So this is going to be a quick overview of replacing the starter motor on a 2004 Nissan Xterra. This is four-wheel drive. I also have a body lift, and this is an automatic transmission, so those are all things that can influence how easy or difficult it is to actually remove the starter. Now normally I get a lot of my information from the factory service manual, but the factory service manual basically says remove 2 bolts and remove starter, and it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And this video is actually just going to be some cell phone clips kind of stitched together. This is a crowdsourced video here. I put a community post out about my starter motor failing. Got lots of great suggestions and tips because I've never replaced one on the Xterra before. So this is just going to be me documenting some tips and tricks as I go through the process myself. First things first, I mentioned in my community post, but you need to make sure that you fix oil leaks. This is from behind the front tires looking forward. You can see this cross member here. It's got a lot of oil on it. If you look up at the bell housing of the transmission, oil is kind of seeping right in between that area. Kind of hard to see. That could be the rear main seal, and it could also be the rear of the oil pan gasket. Now, I believe that because I've neglected that oil leak for so many years, I mean, it's been since as far as I can remember, probably 5 or 6 years now. It's just been a nuisance. It's never lowered the oil enough to actually have problems as far as lubrication goes, but all that oil does get funneled down towards the starter. So if you're not familiar with where the starter is, this is on the front passenger side tire. Go ahead and go over the tire and remove the plastic liner here. And it's going to be in here. I'm going to try and look at it from above. So just for context, my head is basically right underneath the alternator on the front end of the engine. This is the lower control arm. You can see the pivot point and the torsion bar, and this is your oil drain. Slide forward a little bit more. You can see the front differential for four-wheel drive models, and that CV axle is going to be blocking some access a little bit, it looks like. And that is where the starter motor is. And I can see a lot of oil dripping out in that area. It looks like there's a lot of oil there. Of course, before you do anything electrical, remove your battery cables. So I disconnected my battery completely, and just to make sure that my battery terminal didn't accidentally hit the post and cause voltage to go down to where I was working with wrenches, I went ahead and just kind of put a cloth glove around it. That way it insulates it from the actual battery. Don't shock yourself. Now you can see kind of on the top middle of the screen that there are 2 studs there. Those are wired connections. And you need to go ahead and remove the nut so you can get the positive battery cable off. You'll see the circular ring terminal that goes to the main positive battery cable. That's what you need to remove in order to get the starter out. So I'm going in through the wheel well right here. This is the power steering hoses, and just to the right of that, you can see a kind of a wire harness connector. There is some type of wire tie. I ended up just cutting it, but you need to unplug it. This is actually the starter solenoid connection right here. Unplug this. I just cut the little tie strap, but if you want to be legit with it, you can take a flat blade screwdriver and you can kind of pry it out like this. And this piece would stay retained to the main battery cable and wire harness. And then you can just take the plug down. I'm just going to put another zip tie on it. Trying to give you some context here. To the right, you can see the Torsion Bar Anchor, and this is the front passenger side tire. Following the cross member up, then rotating upward, you can see a bolt head right here. That's one of the starter bolts, and really it's kind of underneath the catalytic converter. Let me try and find an angle that you can see it. Right there. That's going to be the other bolt. So there's only 2 bolts that hold it in. So no wobble extension needed on this bottom bolt. I was able to get just a 6-sided impact socket on it and a little breaker bar. So for that upper bolt, I tried the impact socket with a bunch of wobble extensions, trying to get it lined up, and I could just never get enough torque on it. And my 3/8 ratchet with a swivel head for the win for the top bolt. I used a standard well socket. One more little video for context. This is the oil drain plug in the bottom of the oil pan. And if I just go towards the tire side of that, you can see there's a big vertical space up, and there's the starter. And if you look towards the rear of the vehicle, you can kind of see back there, but that's my swivel ratchet. And you don't have a lot of space to move. So definitely, if I could have gotten the wobble extensions up there and just zap that bolt out real quick, that would be a lot better, because I don't want to spend 30 minutes here doing partial turns on the ratchet. But this is the best combination of tools I could come up with. Once you get enough of the threads unthreaded to come out of the starter, there's not much holding it in, and you can see it's ready to come out. Now it's just the puzzle being, because four-wheel drive, you got the CV axle right here that blocks access from bringing it down. You got the differential cross member right there. I'm going to have to try and shoot for the gap between the CV axle and the cross member right in this hole, but I'm not sure how that's going to work. You're probably going to have to kind of pull it out and up until it hits the catalytic converter on the exhaust, and then maybe do a rotate and then down. But that's what I'm going to try and see if it works. But what you got to do is, I removed it from where it was mating in with the flywheel. Then I pushed it up into the exhaust manifold. Then I kind of rotated it around until, you know, the wide dimension of the motor and the solenoid fit through. So to reinstall it, I'm going to try and push it up that way and then kind of put it back into place like that. I removed it from below, past the CV axle, and, you know, past the cross member and everything. I didn't go in above the tire. So you can see there's some oil grime piled up on that starter motor. Trying to look for any type of signs or clues that might indicate rear main seal versus oil pan gasket. Does look like there's some oil and grime in there where the pinion gear is. I want to snake my phone up and try and look inside where the flywheel is, see how oily it is. That should give me a good indication on the condition of my rear main seal. You can see just at the seam of the bell housing, you can see the oil dripping at that seam right there. But the back edge of the oil pan is kind of wedged back there. I've never taken it all apart, so I don't really know the exact geometry of it. So that's what I'm having a trouble with. I don't want to just blindly pay a dealer to do the rear main seal and then find out that it was oil pan gasket, and I don't really want to take my front diff out and drop the oil pan and do all that work only to find out it's the rear main seal. So if anybody has any good ideas on confirming 100% if it's one or the other, I'm all for it. There were 2 bolts that went in here. Those bolts were pretty tight, so I would recommend getting 6-point sockets. I have 12-point sockets, and they were starting to chew up a little bit on the corners of the bolt heads. So really, I gotta say, other than finding the correct combination of wobble extensions and swivel ratchets and, you know, other things, it's really just a couple bolts, but you just gotta figure out how to get enough torque on them to get them free and loosen them up. So as long as you have, you know, some type of universal joint, enough wobble extensions, or, you know, a swivel ratchet, it's really not that difficult, but it is kind of like a puzzle. It takes a little effort, but thanks to you guys, I was able to drop the starter down in about 5 minutes after messing around with the bolts and getting those out.